In this video, we're going to go over two different ways of creating vectors, the direct entry method and concatenation. Using the direct entry method to create vectors is just as the name suggests. We're going to directly enter values inside of our vector. So let's see how this is done. So if I wanted to create a vector and save it inside of the variable vec1, to indicate a vector, I first start off with a square bracket. So square brackets denote vectors. And then now I just directly enter the values that I want to be inside of my vector. So let's say I want to create a vector with the values 2, 8, 1, and 0. I can directly enter those in my vector and close it off with an ending square bracket. So when I'm creating vectors using the direct entry method, using the commas to separate my values is optional. I could just put spaces. However, using commas makes your code more readable. And just as another note, we've created this vector using the direct entry method. We added 4 numbers to it. So what we would say is that the length of this vector is 4. So the length of a vector is the same thing as the number of values inside of it. Another way of creating vectors is through concatenation. Concatenation is just a scary, spooky, fancy word for just smushing stuff together or placing things together. And so we've actually already seen concatenation when we talked about the direct entry method. When we created a vector 2, 8, 1, and 0 using the direct entry method, we were concatenating together 4 different values. Okay, so the direct entry method is a form of concatenation, and concatenation is done with inside of square brackets. However, we can extend this idea to concatenation by using variables. We can concatenate variables together, variables that contain vectors, in order to make other vectors. What I mean by this is, so we already have this variable vec. Let's actually call this vec1. And let's say I have another variable called vec2. And let's say the variable vec2 has the values 3, 4. And that's it. Okay? So our first variable, vec1, the length of this, let's do this in a different color. The length of this is 4. There's 4 values. In vec2, the length of vec2 is 2. There's only 2 values. Now let's say I wanted to create a new vector called vec3 where the values are, let's say this. Let's say I want to create a new vector called vec3 that looked like this. So 2, 8, 1, 0, 3, 4. Okay? So one way of doing that is through the direct entry method, right? I directly entered those 6 numbers. However, we already have 2 other variables that contain vectors in those with those numbers in those same in that same order. So instead of directly entering the numbers, I can concatenate together different vectors in order to create a new vector. So what color? Let's use purple. So I could create this same vec3 by, so this part right here, right? That part right there is saved inside of our vec1. So I can just go ahead and say vec1, and I can concatenate that with, let's use that. I can concatenate that with vec2. Let's use purple again. Okay, so this is also another way of creating this same exact vector. Instead of directly entering the values, we're now concatenating together variables that contain vectors in order to create a larger vector. And lastly, the length of vec3 is 6 because there's 6 numbers inside of there. So this problem asks to create a new vector using 2 previously created vectors. And so as we analyze this new vector that we want to create, we see that these first three numbers are inside of vec2, and these last three numbers are inside of vec1. So therefore, when we're creating our new vector, so vec3, our first numbers here are the ones that are inside of vec2, and our last three numbers are the ones that are inside of vec1. And that's it.